what the effect of this earthquake in this province could be on the rest of China.
It's an inland province. It's quite far from the coast. It's actually one of the most mountainous regions of China and one of the most beautiful. It's a sort of very alpine type scenery. It's characterized by a lot of the towns and villages being built primarily in the valleys between the mountains. So it's an area that's very difficult to access. It's not the poorest area in China, but it's by no means the richest. And it's not an area that's massively benefited from the economic boom of China. It's no Shanghai and it's no Shenzhen.
Okay, well, what we're seeing now is the initial response from the Chinese government. Now, insofar as any country can be prepared for a quake of this scale, how prepared do you think the Chinese authorities have been?
The Chinese authorities actually are very well prepared for disasters. I mean, if you look at China's recent history, they are a government and a country that are used to disasters, humanitarian disasters, natural disasters, and they actually have a very good response rate. They're very good actually at accepting disasters, and I think they cope with them probably better than most countries would, but also they're very good at mobilising the army, and particularly the army and other emergency services at very short notice. I mean, this is a country which has the biggest standing army in the world, some of the largest numbers of emergency services, and they are able to get them around, and they are based around the country. But of course the infrastructure isn't the best. You know, this isn't the US. They're not going to be having huge motorways to every corner of China yet. This is a particularly mountainous area, as we've said, so it's going to be very difficult for them to get large numbers of people there quickly.
Now, you've mentioned that the army has been mobilized here, perhaps in stark contrast with what's happening in Myanmar. Now, China is giving aid to the people of Myanmar. Do you think that that will be affected by what's happened now in its own country?
I mean, it's a good question. I would say that this crisis, of course, is absolutely at the top of the Chinese government leaders' attention now. I mean, effectively, Wen Jiabao has dropped everything, has flown straight to Sichuan, is taking control of this crisis. So, of course, he himself and most of the Chinese leadership are not going to have much time to really be focusing on what's happening in Burma and what China's assistance is going to be there. But having said that, I don't think that before this happened that the situation in Burma was particularly high up the Chinese leaders' list of priorities. So yes, it will affect, and of course there's now going to be a competition for emergency supplies that China has been sending to Burma, so particularly food supplies, emergency shelters, that kind of thing. They are of course going to need desperately in this region. So we may see some of that aid that China might otherwise have given to Burma go to this region. But I think they're two very different types of crisis. This is a massive crisis for China domestically. Burma was a regional crisis which China was lending some assistance to.
Now, the details of the effects of this earthquake in China are still coming out, but in one region, Beichuan County, we're hearing that 80% of the buildings have collapsed from the quake. Now, obviously, the quake was of a massive, very big magnitude, but what do you read into that about the way that buildings are constructed in China?
I think that's a good point as well. I mean, it's 80% of buildings being knocked down. I mean, we need to look very carefully at this town before jumping to any immediate conclusions, but from what I've seen there, of course, most buildings, certainly that have been built in the last few years, have gone up very quickly. They're concrete builds, and they are buildings where I have to say I haven't seen much evidence of significant earthquake proofing. And so I think we have to conclude from this that they are buildings that will not withstand this sort of earthquake, certainly. And also I think, I mean, Chinese government themselves has said that looking at improving the standards of their buildings, improving the quality of their buildings is one of their priorities. And I think it does recognise that it is a problem, that all of this rapid build that's happened in the last few years clearly cannot withstand an earthquake of this type.